We are continuing our study in the book of Acts. We've worked our way up to chapter 23, the middle of chapter 23. And in this particular section of Acts, Paul has returned to Jerusalem. He's finished with the third missionary journey. He went to the city of Jerusalem. He met with the elders in Jerusalem. The elders in Jerusalem realized there was tensions among some of the Jews in Jerusalem, and they tried to appease these tensions and mollify these tensions by recommending to Paul that he sponsor some certain men who were under a Nazirite vow. Paul agreed with this. Paul entered the temple with these men that he sponsored. The Jews saw him there, jumped to the conclusion that Paul had brought Greeks into the temple. They set upon Paul. They began beating him, attempting to kill him. The Roman governor, the tribune, had to intervene, ran down, took Paul from the crowd, tried to figure out what's going on, discovered that Paul was a Roman citizen. He trembled when he realized he had bound a Roman citizen. Still seeking to figure out what was going on, the tribune commanded the council to come together, ordered the council to assemble, put Paul before them in order to understand the charges. Another riot almost broke out. Paul was taken back into protective custody. Now Paul is in protective custody, and the tribune has Paul on his hands, a Roman citizen. Very ticklish situation. The crowd is hostile towards Paul. The tribune doesn't want to, fears that if something happens to Paul, he'll be in trouble. Or if a riot breaks out again, it's a bad thing for him. So while Paul is waiting in custody, the tribune's trying to figure out what to do. We pick up the story here with verse 12. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying they would not eat or drink till they had killed Paul. So these Jews, making a very wicked curse here, bound themselves under a curse. Acts 23:13, and there were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priest and to the elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. So here you are very clearly that these men, these killers, this mob, went to the chief priests and to the elders and told them that they had bound themselves under a curse. Now, why would they go to the chief priests and elders when they had bound themselves under such a dreadful curse? Well, the reason is because they wanted help from the elders. They wanted to draw the elders into this conspiracy. Now remember, this is the chief priests and the elders. This is the rulers. This is the highest authority in the land. This is the highest law of the land. And we can see here that even being in the highest law of the land, we're going to see that these elders participated in this conspiracy. Verse 15. Now therefore ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down, talking about Paul, unto you tomorrow, as though you would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, or ever we come near, are ready to kill him. So here we have not only these 40 people involved in this conspiracy, but the leaders of the land, the chief priests and the elders, the highest law of the Jewish land, are also involved in this deadly, dangerous, and highly illegal conspiracy to murder Paul. Continuing in Acts 23, verse 16. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Now this verse strikes like a bolt out of the blue. Who knew that Paul had a sister? Who knew that Paul had a nephew? Who knew that they were in Jerusalem? And this raises all kinds of interesting questions, such as, was this nephew following in the steps of Paul? Was he a student at the feet of Gamaliel? Did his mom and sister's family live in Jerusalem? Did Paul have other extended family living in Jerusalem? Were they Christians? There's all kinds of things questions that come out of this, and we don't know the answer to these questions. And this brings us to a point. It's not about us. It's about Christ. And Paul's focus and the focus of Dr. Luke as he's writing these things is on Christ, not about us. Anyway, Paul's nephew enters into the picture here very briefly. Verse 17, then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he has a certain thing to tell him. And so he took him and brought him unto the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who has something to say to thee. So the nephew now appears before the tribune, this very important, and I'm sure imposing Roman figure. He had a lot of authority in Rome. He was a commander of many men. And so this young man is expected to speak to the tribune. Now take notice of how the tribune handles this situation. Verse 19. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, what is that thou hast to tell me? So the fact that the tribune took this nephew by the hand gives some indication that this was a smaller child. You wouldn't do this to a full-grown man, but this was a young boy, perhaps a preteen or a early teens, that the chief captain would take him by the hand. And look at the sensitivity of the chief captain, knowing how to handle this situation very delicately. The chief captain, the tribune, didn't get into his position of authority by being a dummy, by being a social klutz. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to read people. He understood people undoubtedly. And so he handles the situation very, very delicately by taking this young man by the hand. And this is an awkward age for kids. I remember myself when I was at this age, just kind of learning myself, moving into young adulthood. I remember one particular story one time. When I was a kid, we always had water in the refrigerator. We always had milk in the refrigerator, and sometimes we would have Coke or Cool Pop or some sweet drink in the refrigerator. And the water and the milk, we could drink whenever we wanted. But this sugary drinks, Mom didn't like us to drink those just at our own discretion. And so we had to ask permission to have these soda pops and things. And I remember at a certain age, I wheeled into the den one day and asked, Mom, can I have some Coke? And this is what my mother said to me. She said, you're old enough to make your own decision about these things, I think now. Thanks, Mom. Okay. But that stuck with me. That was a very important moment in my life when I realized Mom was handing over to me the wanting me to make my own decisions, wanting me to think for myself. I had been attuned to the voice of my parents. I had been listening to the voice of my parents, and that's what kids should do. Learn to listen to their parents in order to hear the voice of authority in their life. And that teaches a person how to hear the voice of God later on in their life, how to respect the authorities, the civil authorities in their life, how to respect the teachers and important people, mentors in their life. It's a very important skill to learn. And so this young man was apparently going through this transition as well, and the captain was sensitive to that. So he took the man aside privately and asked him, what hast thou to tell me? Verse 20. And the young man said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring Paul down tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire of him somewhat more perfectly. The young man continues in verse 21. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath, that they will neither eat nor drink that they have killed until they have killed him. Now are ready looking for a promise for thee. So what an explosive accusation this young man brought to the tribune. Can you imagine the delicate situation he's in now with this information? And the tribune, I'm sure, being accustomed to reading people, being in authority over people, understood and the reason that Paul wanted the nephew to speak to the tribune directly and personally was that the tribune would get a sense of honesty. He would see the honesty in this young man's face and in his words, and realize that it was a true thing that was being told unto him. And these accusations are amazing. There lie in wait more than 40 men which have bound themselves with an oath. And this is a very wicked oath. And the Bible has quite a bit to say about oaths and vows and promises. And I'm going to say more about that later on, depending on the time we have left. But just know that this is considered a wicked oath that these conspirators have bound themselves under. And that they will not eat nor drink, and they are ready looking for a promise from the tribune. So the tribune takes this very seriously. And look what the tribune does. Verse 22. So the chief captain then let the young men depart, and look what he says. Charged him, see thou tellest no man that thou hast shown these things to me. So the tribune was concerned for the young man's safety. That sharing such an important and dangerous secret would have imperiled the young man himself had it gotten out that he knew the secret. And which raises the question, how could these conspirators expect to keep a secret when they went and told the Sanhedrin council what their business was about? And so there's somebody's talking, the secrets are out, and it's no longer a secret. It came to the important person who needed to know. And so you can see these men were conspiring against God himself, because God had promised Paul that Paul would appear before Rome. And so all these things are kind of coming together in this very fascinating story. So the captain was very concerned for the safety of the young man, telling him, don't tell anybody that you know this. So he sent the young man on the way, and then look what happens. Verse 23, and he called unto him 2 centurions, that's 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, that's 70 men, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night. And so what we have here is we have 470 men, 470 armed soldiers, Roman soldiers, protecting Paul. And when were they going to go? At the 3rd hour of the night, in the wee hours of the morning. They were going to leave the fortress. They were going to take Paul under heavy guard against this threat. The government took this very seriously. And this gives you a sense of the anxiety that the tribune had for the life of Paul. A sense of anxiety not just for Paul, but for his own reputation, for his own position as head of the garrison there in Jerusalem. And provide them beasts. So Paul is going to ride on the beasts, and that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. So they're going to mount Paul. Paul's going to be on a horse or some kind of beast of burden for this journey. They want Paul to make it there in safety. And so they're going to bring him to this person, Felix the governor. And this person, Felix, is a very fascinating character in history. Felix was born a slave. And he was not just any old slave, but Felix was born, Felix's mother was a slave of Claudius's mother. And what that means is that Felix played with the emperor when they were children. The two mothers had this relationship of master-slave, and their kids all played together. And so Felix had a very personal bond with the emperor, having grown up together and played together. And people who played with the emperor got privilege, and they learned from being around the emperor how to conduct themselves. They would often go to school or be instructed similar to the emperor and so on. And so apparently these two boys learned some of these skills, but Felix wasn't really the main brother here. Felix had a brother named Paulus, and Paulus was the person who was deep and had a close relationship with the emperor. And it's through Paulus's connections that he got his brother Felix this appointment as governor in Judea. Now, this was a very significant appointment. I understand from reading that Felix was the first man who was appointed governor who rose from slavery to be appointed governor. This had never happened before in the history of the Roman Empire, that someone had moved from slave to governor. But Felix was not a nice person. Felix was a bitter, he was cruel, he was petty, he was vindictive, and the Jews chafed under this ruler. They didn't like Felix. He antagonized the Jews. And so Felix was not a good leader, and ultimately in 60 Felix was called back to Rome to answer for his mishandling of the duties entrusted to him. So Felix was notoriously cruel and corrupt. There was a famous historian, Tacitus, remarked about Felix, exercised the power of the king with the mind of a slave, is how Tacitus described this governor. So this is the person Paul is taken to, the governor of Judea. Now, as governor, Felix was the highest Roman official in the province. He held the supreme civil and military authority. His responsibilities included collecting taxes, maintaining order, and serving as the chief judge for all major legal cases. And so we see in verse 25 that the tribune, and he wrote a letter after this manner. So this is the letter that accompanied Paul. Verse 26, Claudius Listus, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greetings. So here we have to pause and just take a peek at this phrase, the most excellent governor. So this was a formal address. This was a formula when when a lower ranking official addressed his superior. It was a formal title used as part of a standard part of correspondence and addressed for Roman governors, procurators, and other dignitaries. And by using this title, Claudius Listus shows the proper respect and deference to his boss, to his superior. And it's also worth noting that Luke, in writing the book of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, addresses Theophilus as most excellent Theophilus. So this gives some indication to scholars that Theophilus was a Roman dignitary of some note. Moving on to verse 27. So this is the letter that Felix writes. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, understanding that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, verse 29, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bond. So Felix is acknowledging the fact that he's confused over why they were trying to kill Paul. Verse 30, and when it was told to me how the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave command to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. So short and sweet, right to the point. Felix hands his problem off to the governor. Felix, the tribune, gets his problem off his hands. I'm sure he's glad to be done with that problem. Verse 31, then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul, brought him by night into Antipatris. So Antipatris is about halfway from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And on the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle. The foot soldiers, the 400 returned to the castle, sent on the cavalry. Verse 33, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. So notice here, so Felix wants to know, Paul, where are you from? And this wasn't an idle question, but this was a question of significance. It was a crucial step in determining the legal process. In the Roman Empire, a governor's judicial authority was strictly limited to their specific province, and a trial conducted outside of the governor's province was invalid. So Felix was concerned to know what province Paul was from. So, continuing in verse 24, and when he understood that he was of Cilicia, verse 35, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So Felix realizes that Paul, being from Cilicia, being a Roman citizen, falls under his own jurisdiction, and that he will hear Paul's case and take up the case. And we will continue on, Lord willing, next time to see how this unfolds.